at Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia. Pak Philip, floor is yours.
Bang Vedi, thank you for agreeing to do this, and to my fellow lecturers and students, welcome to this event. We've been planning this for quite a long time, but we could not find a good commentator for our journal, and then suddenly we knew that Prof. Hadiz is here in Jakarta, so we thought that it would be great to have him commenting on the journal specifically. But we've been talking to Prof. Hadiz before a few days ago, and we are telling him that we would like to hear about from his knowledge on the production of knowledge, especially coming from Indonesia and developing countries, and in our context, the Indonesian International Islamic University as a new university with the mandate of providing training for masters and PhDs with scholarship from the Indonesian government, and for students mostly coming from developing countries. So that would be, I think, very relevant to hear from Dr. Hadiz. And I believe in some of our classes, we read his journal articles. So we assign the students to read Prof. Hadiz's work, academic work, and then that's why I think we qualify to be Ahlul Hadis, the reader of Prof. Hadiz's academic works. So without much saying anymore, I'd like once again to welcome Prof. Hadiz in our beautiful campus, new campus, and of course I'm hoping that we're going to have a good academic engagement with regard to our journal. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Philip, for your kind introductions. So, Pak, actually, I would like to introduce Pak Vedi first before he starts with giving of his thoughts. Pak Vedi is an Indonesian who has been teaching at two Australian university for a decade or more. So he finished undergraduate degree at the University of Indonesia, and he finished a PhD degree at the University of Murdoch in Australia. He is now serving as a director and professor of Asian Studies at the Asia Institute and assistant deputy Vice-Chancellor International at the University of Melbourne, Australia. This is one of the largest university in Australia, probably the largest. Without further ado, floor is yours, Pak Vedi. You will have like until 11 to 11:10 before we are going to start with a question and answer sessions, and then we hope that we can finish by 11:30.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am very honored to be invited to this occasion. Thank you very much to Pak Phillips and to Pak An for inviting me. I would actually try, although I often mistime myself, but I would actually like to try to speak for maybe 30 minutes so that we can have more time for discussion. Sometimes I go over because I talk too much, basically. But this time I'll try to be quite disciplined with myself, so that we'll have 40 minutes of discussion, hopefully. Okay. So first of all, the first thing I would like to say in relation to this beautiful journal that's come out of this university is congratulations. I think it is a wonderful achievement for a new university like Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia to be able to come up so quickly with this journal, which is not just this body of, 300 pages or whatever you can see on the PDF on the website, but in it actually contains the ambitions or reflects the ambitions of this faculty and of this university, right? So you are a new university and a new faculty coming up with this. I think it is quite reflective of the ambitions that you have set out for yourselves. And so I congratulate you on having lofty ambitions, because it is, because frankly, right, and in our sort of, remember I am Indonesian, in our sort of social setting, it is very easy to receive, let's say, funding from the Ministry of Religion, set up a university, etc., and just coast, right? Just relax, receive the money, and just do the minimum amount that's necessary. And 9 out of 10 times, you get away with it. But to actually set yourselves with an ambition which may be higher than what is normally expected or other institutions set for themselves, I think is a good reflection of this institution. So congratulations again, right? So I've had a look at the 2 issues that have come out. I've not read every article from beginning to end because I only received them on Saturday. But I will start by saying that I think that the quality of the journals as of the editions as they are now are already between good and very good. Okay, and I think it is possible. Perhaps, through many of the things that will come up, hopefully during our talk and our discussion today, to think about how, this promising journal, which I would say is between good and very good, can become distinctly very good. And maybe in the future, we'll call it excellent. Okay? So I think that's what we need to do today, to think about how to make a journal which is good, going towards very good, into a journal which in a few years can be really up there and has got a name for itself and a reputation for itself. Remember, right? This is an academic world today that is inundated with journals, right? In fact, it seems to me now that every university, every faculty in every university in Indonesia has a journal. And not to be too unkind, probably half of them should be out of business. Okay, but the reality is that we are inundated, just in Indonesia, with so many journals, not to speak of internationally. Right? So how do you actually stand out? How do you stand out? Certainly in your own field. How do you stand out in such a way that the best people in your field will think about writing in your journal rather than other journals? That actually is ultimately the test of how good you are perceived to be. I'm fairly old. I've been doing this for about 30 years. So I have a bit of a reputation in my field. And unless there's a particular reason that has to do with sort of personal friendly relations and so on, I would be very choosy about which journals I send my articles to. Right? And that's the sort of people you want in your journal, the people who are choosy. Not just the people who go, well, this may be an easy journal to get into. Okay? Why? Because when you have that, then you have the capacity to influence the debates in your field. Because the people who are on the leading, on the front end of those debates are writing for you. That raises your impact factor, that raises your citation rates, and it means that even people who don't have a reputation yet, but have lofty ambitions about their own careers will go, well, I think I'll write there, because it will be good for my build-up of my CV. So that's that's the level at which you need to reach, right? Being a journal where it is the first or second voice if somebody were to write something about Muslim politics. Okay. So, I'm sure that Pak Aan and Pak Phillips and Pak Jamhari and others have thought about what the aims of the journal should be, right? But as an outsider, maybe I could just, suggest what these might be, right? In more general terms. One, of course, we want to have a high quality international journal publication. We don't want to be clumped together, and this may sound a bit mean, but we don't want to be clumped together with all the thousands of journals that come out of all sorts of faculties and all sorts of the 4,000 universities in Indonesia. We don't want that. We want to consistently be able to publish a journal which has a high quality and has international level recognition. I think that is the aim, right? Not just the national arena. Is that your interventions are not, I think, should not be confined to the domestic arena, but to the academic debates in the international arena. I'm sure that Pak Aan and Pak Phillips and others agree with me on this, and I'm sure they've thought of this themselves, right? The other aim, and this is a bit of a social aim, I think, is to actually bring to Indonesia or advance within Indonesia the culture and practices associated with publication of international academic journals. So even though we have tens of thousands of journals, I think probably, that come out regularly or semi-regularly or whenever they like, that comes out of Indonesia, we want a journal that would bring to this country the best practices, right, associated with publishing international academic journals. So even though we publish a lot, they're not published on the basis of best practices, like for example, peer review. I mean, lots of journals in Indonesia have very questionable peer review processes, or even though they claim in the front that peer review takes place. Right? So bring to Indonesia that international best practices. Thirdly, I think, and again, this is actually a social aim, we would want actually to bring up national and maybe regional researchers so that they can benefit from participating with a publication that actually practices those international standards. By that, what happens, hopefully, is that we contribute to the raising of the standards of academic research and publication in Indonesia and in the region. And if, for example, somebody, I don't know most of you in this room, but somebody in this room finds that they're in a journal together in an edition with James Piscatori, they go, well, I am in a journal that is at a level where James Piscatori is interested in publishing. Right? And that, I think, is meaningful. The more of that can take place, I think, the more that this journal contributes to the culture of international academic publishing in Indonesia, which frankly is still very poor. And part of the reason is really, and I say this a lot, and I often get a lot of flack when I say this, it's because, generally speaking, for a very long time, and up to now, to be honest, we have, I think, even with all the rhetoric about internationalization, etc., basically our academic community is insular. It looks inward rather than outward. And of course you can say, well, I want to influence the debates in my country. And that's a valid reason. But then again, if you're doing that as an excuse not to get into the international debates, then you may be shortchanging yourself in terms of the quality that you may be able to aspire towards. Oh, I just want to write for Indonesians. But, and then you say, well, that's because it's, my audience is Indonesians. Okay, that's nice. But what if you say that because, well, really, it's just too hard to get into the international journals. And then you come up with these nationalist sort of jargons to sort of legitimize and validate the fact that you don't do this. I think that is really, really something that is prevalent in academia. And in fact, I go to many, many campuses in Asia and have given sort of training, on academic journal publishing, and there will always be somebody who says, oh, why do I have to bother with this? Okay, my audience is here. Right? So, in a way, essentially, what this journal for me, being invited here, my hope is that it'll become an instrument to help fight the culture of academic insularity. Okay? Now, there are some, those are the lofty things, but there are also some nitty-gritty things that you have to pay attention to when you, sort of enter the international field, right? So, I think, these look good, right? But here and there, like for example, I don't know what this is for. Right? Okay? Okay, all right? So, yeah, so we've got to avoid these sorts of things because somebody over in, the university in Melbourne or the UK go, they publish like this. Okay, all right? It gives a bad impression. Okay, so the contents may be good, but then if you present yourself in a way that doesn't do justice to the content, you're undermining yourself.
That means now it's your turn.
Okay? So pay attention to those sorts of things, I would say. English is always a problem, of course, for our researchers, and I understand that the university invests in copy editing and so on, and that's certainly very good in terms of training and supporting our researchers be able to get into the international arena because, the fact of the matter is that we will always be disadvantaged as a nation because, English isn't our first language. I'm able to speak English fairly well because I've been based overseas for 25 years. Okay? I can even do Irish accents. Usually when I say that, and then I sort of segue into giving an impression, but I won't do that. I was saying to Phillips that generally speaking, I think the copy editing is good, but that occasionally I still find that the sentences can be quite stilted. So the stilted should not be conflated with complex. Right? Complex, it may be difficult to understand because there's also ideas in it and so on, and maybe it could be better explicated, maybe if you cut a sentence that's very long in 2 sentences, those sorts of things. But you would want to avoid mistakes like subclause of a sentence here is when the world rubber price skyrocketing. It should be when the world rubber price skyrocketed. Or when world rubber prices skyrocketed. So the use of verb is incorrect. You'd want to avoid those sorts of things. I'm sure you're already investing in this and paying attention to these things, and of course some things are true. I know that for sure because I've been referees and I'm on boards of various and book sort of editorial boards and so on, and there's always these things that slip by depending on how these things are organized and so on. But you'd want to try to avoid these sorts of things. Okay, so content, right, and the ambition of the content, but don't undermine yourself unnecessarily, by being maybe just slightly a little sloppy in the presentation. Okay, is what I'd like to say there. Now, the other thing is, I said, how would you stand out, right? How would you stand out? Now, there's a lot of ways to think about that. One is to think about, really, what is your niche? You look at the journals on, let's say, just broadly Islamic studies in the world today, what is your niche? Right. For example, I write quite a bit in the area of area studies, right? I write quite, I'm a professor of Asian studies, so I write quite often in Asian studies journals, right? When I write something that has a more critical political economy sort of bent to it, I would think, oh, well, I'll send this to the Journal of Contemporary Asia because that's what they're known for. Right. Now, what is it that you'd want to be known for? Okay, I think you need to think about that and look at the competition. What is your niche there? Within Indonesia itself, there is already one competitor, and that is Studia Islamica. Oh, you're in two boats, are you? Whoa, easy. So which one are you spying for? Right? So I think already you need to think about, well, how are you different from Studia Islamica? Just for, Indonesian writers, who want, because Studia Islamica has actually been quite successful with limited resources. So how do you distinguish yourself from the competition? One way to do that is actually to be very narrow about what you do. So it can be, as the title suggests, Muslim Politics Review. It's all about Muslim politics. That's it. And you'll be known for it. In a way, that's fine. But in another way, you may be taking the risk of separating yourself from a lot of potentially good writers who write on Islam, but don't think of themselves as political scientists, but do write about politically relevant matters. So I wonder, and this is for you to think, this is just, things off the top of my head, whether you should have something that says politics as defined broadly. Because I think it might be useful, given the very limited pool, really, of good writers that we have, in Indonesia, maybe a bit more around the region. If you didn't, for example, make room for political anthropologists or political sociologists, political linguists, and if you had an inordinate sort of number of issues, which is about electoral behavior in Muslim societies. I mean, again, the balance between having that identity and also being inclusive is something that needs to be struck. Where do you find that proper balance? And I think you might want to think about that. Okay. Now, how do you bring in, authors with who are high citation rate, and so on? And it's very difficult for an upstart journal. Extremely difficult. I know that, for example, one of them in Korea that started maybe 10 years ago did something that was very unusual, and that is it basically paid its well-known contributors, to so that they would publish there instead of somewhere else. And they would invite them to Korea to go to some symposia and so on. And then the guys will think, oh, all right, they give me a free trip, they give me a bit of money, oh, well, I'll write something for them. But that's an expensive kind of route. I know that you've done 2 symposia, right? That's one way of doing it. It's interesting that the first symposia brought in lots of, sort of established names. Generally, I think, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 of them, these were really, big names. Whereas the second symposia brought in sort of, more up and coming researchers rather than the big names. Now, I would suggest that rather than separating these two, you would think about editions that would combine the two. Because otherwise, nobody will look at that second journal with with people who are not known. But if they are in a journal with really big names, then people will go, hey, whoa, this looks interesting too. I'll read this. Right? So I would suggest looking at, I don't know whether it was a deliberate strategy, but I would suggest trying to combine the established and the up and coming because of the social aims I was mentioning earlier, taking up researchers locally and regionally and taking them to those, sort of more international sort of level. I think you might want to think about that. Symposia and all that are useful. Another thing is, I don't know whether you've done this, call for papers, call for special issues. I think that's important. You'll often get, sort of ambitious, up and coming researchers who want to lead research projects. Often these special issues in other journals. Can I have a glass of water, please? I'm old. These special issues often provide an outlet for research projects, joint research projects that people have undertaken before. So the possibility of the articles being of a fairly good quality is not too bad, depending on who's doing the research project, obviously, right? So you might want to sort of, on the one hand, open up for, once a year, a special issue, right? A third way of doing this, I think, is to work with other institutions to come up with either these special issues or specific editions. So I know that Philips and others, have strong connections with ICs and various institutions globally. Maybe look at a joint, UEEE and ICs edition, or joint UEE and US edition. Yeah, these sorts of things, or the Koreans or the Japanese, and then you bring in the researchers from these places as well. I think there are ways to think about these things that often they're actually quite obvious, but we don't undertake it because we don't plan. So I think it is necessary to actually have 3-year plans about what your journals are going to be about. And so that if you have a 3-year plan, right, you can already say that, well, that's 6 journals, maybe 2 of them will be special issues. And then there's a lot of time then to select and make sure that the quality is high, it's the right combination of people and so on. But if you don't have that 3-year plan, let's say, you can't really do that. Okay. Uh, Another thing, and this may be for the future, and again, this is not something I'm recommending, but something that you will maybe want to think about at some stage in the future, is this: can MPR survive by itself? So when I was teaching in NUS before I went back to Australia, uh, 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 I think I think I'm still on the board of the Asian Journal of Social Science in NUS. Originally, it was the Southeast Asian Journal of Social Science, and then they changed it to Asian Journal of Social Science. And what they did at that point is they made a deal with Brill. So for 20 years, it was a journal that was there, but it wasn't really seen. But what Brill did was it provided marketing and editorial support, and also a system, of submission and reviewing and so on. So, is that something you would think about doing in the future? Of course, you have to think about, you know, why would they want to do it with you, and what is the advantage for you to do it? I think the advantages for you are potentially quite easy to guess. Greater reach because of the marketing, and also because if you're connected with Brill or Elsevier or Taylor and Francis, people will look at your journal and go, "Oh, it's a Taylor and Francis journal, so it's probably quite good." Okay, but again, there are issues of autonomy and so on, which you would have to negotiate. Okay. So that's a question for the future, I think, that you may want to start thinking about now. A couple of other things. Have I gone? I have gone. Okay. Last two things I want to say. One is this. I see you have an international advisory board and editorial board. Now, the thing is this. I am on the international advisory board of I don't know how many journals. I don't know. Really, I have no idea. Most of them never contact me. They just want to put my name on the thing. You shouldn't do that. What you need to do is to optimize on the people who are listed as your international advisory board members, because these are the guys that first their names give you clout, but they should not just be ornamental. They have networks. They have networks of authors. They have networks of peer reviewers. They have networks of publishers, right? You should take advantage of them. You should have, yearly, if possible, maybe biannually, if not possible, editorial board meetings where, your international, sort of partners and so on are present to provide overviews, advice, suggestions. So make use of them, not just as ornaments. Okay, that's the last substantive thing I want to say. The final thing is this. Uh, in this current age, given the amount of resources that has to be invested in publishing something like this, financially, but also human resources, uh, look, frankly, a lot of journals, if they want to make their mark, has to be led initially by somebody quite mad. Are you mad?
A bit.
Uh, you have to be quite mad because you really need to live and breathe this. And you have to go around the world and say, well, look at this, and promote it, and this is your life. So if you're not mad yet, I suggest going insane fairly quickly. And so you need that. And the other thing is, look, it's a big step just to do this, because once you do this and then you don't do it, then you have reputational damage, right? So it's a risk. Doing this is a risk. But I hope that the sort of rewards that you get will be worth it, not just for this institution, but in terms of contributing to raising the level of academic scholarship, research, and publications. So I congratulate you on taking that risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Okay, thank you very much for giving us comments. We are very grateful to have comments from you as internationally recognized scholars. Yeah. So we have got a lot of comments that so that we can improve our journal. So we now invite questions and answers from questions from our audience. Please raise your hand, Pak Jamhari, and gentleman behind, and Pak Faisal. Okay, would you like to collect questions first, or you are going to answer one by one? Okay. Okay. Okay, so one by one, yeah. So let us start with Pak Jamhari, and then so what is your name? Ma'ruf, yeah, and Pak Faisal.
Thank you, Pak Freddy. Very stimulating presentation and encouraging presentation too. I think it is good for us that we listen to your lecture for that. My question is two. One is that as a administrator of the university, what should we do to promote this journal? One thing. The second one is about the international indexes. You mentioned Elsevier and Taylor and others. So should we aim for that international indexes or not? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks for the question. On the international indexes, look, we live in a world that's constituted in a way that we had no input in creating. Right? We live under circumstances that we didn't choose. And in those circumstances, it is dictated that if you want to have an internationally sort of recognized publication, etc., 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 you need to be indexed. Unless you are the journal Indonesia at Cornell, where I know Ben Anderson, because I used to know Ben, didn't. Oh, I was about to swear there. I won't do that. I didn't give a about about being in index in indices. It is because he's dead. Because he's dead, and the people who've taken over are not Ben Anderson. You see, yeah. I mean, Eric Taglioso is a great scholar, but he ain't Ben Anderson, right? In terms of his name and all of that, right? So I would suggest, that you have to aim for that, whether you like it or not. It's the reality of the world we live in, whether we agree with that reality or not. Okay, so I think you do have to do that, because you have to have impact factors on. I find that a lot of young scholars, they actually look at these things when they choose. Oh, what's the journal's impact factor? Who's written in? They do, the really, well, at least overseas, that I know, the really ambitious young scholars actually take time to do that. They develop a strategy on how to, raise their careers, very good. So if you don't have that, I think it will be a problem, and it's compounded by the fact that, okay, I mean, just to say, very bluntly, you're coming out of a new university in Indonesia, right? So that already works against you, right? So I think that if you're that and you're not, let's say, Scopus Index, I think it will undermine a lot of your aims. Okay. Now, how do you promote it as administrators? That's something that has to be multi-pronged. I'm not a marketing expert, but I do know that many universities, right, have sort of marketing sort of sections, but most of them think about marketing about is about having student events or about having a nice I don't know some nice story on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. But the thing is, I think if you've got a marketing section here, you gotta work with them. You gotta instruct them to actually to use the resources that are available to this university to promote your journal, because it is in the interest of the university for this journal to be known. And you have to convince the powers that be, not just the marketing people, but the rector and so on, that is in the interest of the university to do that. So first of all, you have to use your own resources. Once you've used your own resources optimally, then you can think about how you might use other resources. For example, to work out a deal with ICES or another journal where they would advertise your journal, and then you would do the same for them. But they would go, well, if you're not known, why would I want to advertise in your journal? You know what I mean? So these sorts of things, there are lots of marketing tricks and so on that you can do, but you've got to have the university bureaucracy and the marketing people in your university to work with you to develop that 3-year plan I was talking about. Should include a marketing component. Okay, because otherwise we just look, in this day and age, we can't just think that, oh, if it's good, then everybody will know it. That doesn't happen. Okay, you actually have to make an effort to make the world know that it is good. Okay.
Now, Ma'ruf, could you please tell where you come from and
Yeah.
then where do you study?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Professor Vedi. I like your speech a lot, particularly because it's socially unbiased and very practical to follow. My name is Maruf Aman, currently pursuing MA Education at UIII from Pakistan. So my question is, how do you think AI, which has developed than ever before, can help editors of journals fasten the process of making Muslim Politics Review or any other journal from being good to excellent? Thank you so much.
Okay. In a way, this is a really difficult question because the technology still is evolving. But I am of the view that whether we like it or not, AI is here to stay. And rather than making it the enemy all the time, you have to try to use its capacities. Now, speaking of capacities, though, I think that some of the capacities of the current AI, at least those, sort of publicly available, right, are overrated. Because I have, sort of tried out a few of these platforms, ChatGPT, the Bing one, and one other one. I asked them something like, what happened between the Shailendra and Sanjaya dynasties in old Mataram in the 8th and 9th century? And they tell me something. I said, that's wrong. And they go, oh, I apologize for the wrong information I provided you before. This is what. Yeah. So they give you constantly wrong information, right? So you have to be quite critical as well and cautious in the way that you use AI. But if AI could help in things like sort of copy editing, especially copy editing translations, right? I think that would help the work of an editor quite well. So some of the sort of technical capacity things that AI can do, I think we can make use of. But I would be at this point still very cautious about asking AI about factual information. I remember asking AI something about myself, and then it told me that I have published books that I've never published. Yeah. So there are things about it that are good. We have to be, I think, very critical, very cautious about how we start incorporating AI into how we do things. Yeah.
Okay, and last question for the first stage, Pak Faisal. So we still have like 25 minutes, so probably we can open another termin, yeah, or another stage.
Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Prof. Vedi, my name is Moh Faisal Karim. I hopefully soon to be joining Triple IU as a faculty member. But currently, I'm here representing Journal of ASEAN Studies. We are one of the two journals from political science indexed by Scopus already. The questions that I want to ask you is about you said about how Indonesian university are basically insular, but I would suggest further that community of scholars is also insular, because even though we thought that after having a Q1 or Q2 Scopus, there are a lot of people will queue and send us a good articles, but it turns out wrong. Still 90% of many journals article from Indonesia, submissions coming from Indonesia. In your view, of course, you mentioned about promotion. Do you think there is a bias because you are from the global south, probably because you are from Indonesia, and that bias, how can you overcome that? And secondly, there is a kind of a new discussion among journals editors talking about how to create kind of a cartel of citation, because at the end of the day, journal like international organization, journal like ASEAN Political Science Review, they're all also based on cartel. People cite their supervisors because there are people who they know writing for that journal. So do you think is ethically or probably is a good strategy to have kind of a cartels in a good way, a cartel to increase our citations? Thank you so much.
Yeah, people go through all sorts of complicated efforts to increase their citations. Sometimes I just wish that they just produce good work. For example, and I hope I'm not insulting anybody here, but I have looked at some of the citations of some Indonesian scholars, for example, who are unexpectedly high. Unexpectedly, because I don't know who the hell they are. Yeah. Yeah. So how does that happen? There was this thing from Kompas recently about jockeying and so on. I mean, look, that's a business, right? Right. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, it seems to me, is that if you're teaching a class and then there's this what is it regulation, right? If at master's level everybody has to write something, right? Oh, just tell all your students to cite you, right? And every year you get a few hundred guaranteed citations, right? And these are the things that I think the reasons why I see that, for example, scholars I've never heard of have higher citation rates than Pat Phillips, which is ridiculous, right? So I would say that we don't want to go that route. Why? Because it creates a reputational damage. People will think that we're just a citations factory, and that's not the way that I think you'd want to be perceived. But you are correct that there is this bias about, okay, well, I want to publish in journals that are published in the UK or the US or whatever. Certainly, and and that's because historically and in reality, in the present day, the best journals in the world are produced from over there. So one of the things that actually, you can campaign on, really, once you get at that level, is to say, well, we are one of the few journals from the global south, that aspires to compete with these sorts of journals. I think that's a line that I think would be quite politically appealing to authors all across the region, the global south, and there's a lot of them, and many of them are good. The Philippines, Korea, India, and so on, right? But also appeal to established or even younger scholars over in the global north who are sympathetic and also have, what is it, disgruntlement or discontentment about the inherently unfair nature of the way that the academic and publishing world is constituted. Look, frankly, it is unfair, but the whole world is unfair. I mean, the unfairness in academia and the publishing world is just a reflection of how money and power is skewed in the world, right? So, so that's one thing, to sort of not just be a representative of Indonesia, but of the global South. But again, I return to something I said earlier. Will you, in the future, consider whether you would want to join up with something like Brill or Taylor and Francis and so on? And then people actually forget, they see it as a Taylor and Francis, as a Brill, as an Elsevier journal. Then you actually mostly get rid of that problem of, it comes from Indonesia. So that's an advantage of doing that, but you'll have to explore what the disadvantages may be. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Pak Vedi. We still have time for 15 minutes, and we can still open another round of questions. Okay, ladies, Bu Sylvia, and sorry, what was your name? Ali and I think for questions, yeah. It's okay. But can you please briefly ask your questions? We start with Ali first.
Thank you so much for this, for your speech. My name is Ali. I'm from Yemen, master student in Faculty of Social Science. My question is, what should be the first goal for the journal? To be popular or to be effective? Because we know today we have a lot of journals, we have a lot of publishing people, but they still in their paper. There is nothing effective in the world in the for the politics itself. Thank you.
Well, this goes back to the perennial debate about what is the academic world's contribution to the broader world, right, outside of the academic world, and in the look, I write on political economy, political sociology, but I write on Asian studies, right? In that in the political economy and Asian studies in the 60s and 70s, journals came up. This is during the counter revolution, cultural revolution, in the West and so on. They came out specifically to challenge the status quo. So the content of their journals were critical. There was Bulletin of Concerned Asian Scholars, which is now is now Critical Asian Studies. Third World Quarterly came out at about the same time. A couple of other journals, and the Journal of Contemporary Asia. It was so quote unquote effective, right, that it was hidden. It was put in a hidden area in the library of the National University of Singapore because Lee Kuan Yew wouldn't want people to read it. That's how quote unquote effective it was. In fact, there was a story in the Straits Times in the 70s where the PAP didn't like the Journal of Contemporary Asia. Okay. Now the thing is, and this has to be an editorial mission. Editorial sort of decision. Is that the sort of thing that you want your journal to be sort of known for? Reading the first two editions, it didn't seem to me that was what you were going for. If that was what you were going for, I would have mentioned it in my speech. And there were lots of other things that we could talk about to have that, for example, to be a bridge between academia and civil society, blah, blah. There's lots of other things we could talk about if that was the aim of the journal. So the aims that I talked about there was based on my reading of these two editions. Now, I think I am correct that you're not heading in that way, right? If you were heading in that way, I don't mind, but it would have been a different speech. Okay? But look, the word effective and impactful now, right, has been appropriated by governments. And we have to be careful about that too. Because in the 60s and 70s, when we said impactful, it meant having an impact on civil society. Now, when governments say impact, they want to have an impact on business. So also be careful about bandying about the term effective, impactful, having, sort of real sort of, impact on society. Because the question is now really is, well, which part of society? And that has to be defined and redefined and contested and so on. And I don't think that discussion has taken place yet. Okay, I'm not against that discussion. In fact, I'm part of journals who are like that. Right, but it doesn't seem to be the way that we are going here, and therefore I didn't, sort of dwell on those sorts of issues. But I would actually caution about, saying, "Oh, we're impactful, etc., and the government says, "Yes, we want you to be impactful in terms of contributing to government policy on building roads," which is the way that impactful is being defined now, technocratically. Okay, so don't fall into that trap as well when you're bandying about those terms. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bu Sylvia. So please keep your question short.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the opportunities. So my question is first, I'm interested in how a journal promoting autonomous knowledge, but autonomous knowledge, but how to separate or how to make a boundaries between autonomous knowledge and hegemony of knowledge itself. And the second, when you are talking about niche, can we say that can we how to attract, let's say, decolonial scholar to promote alternative discourse? So since this one is a new journal, and the last thing is, I really want to thank you for your explanation about. I know now a little bit about the scholar and power from your explanation. Thank you.
Bu Sylvia is one of PhD students at the Faculty of Social Sciences, and she teaches at President University, private university in Indonesia.
Okay. I am sympathetic to the decolonialization sort of impulse. I'm sympathetic to generally, I don't know, Pat Phillips has known me for a long time. Yeah. Is there one thing that I haven't criticized? Right. So those sorts of things, that's been my bread and butter for 30 years, right? But I am careful about a few things, right? And one of the things I am careful about is the idea of autonomous knowledge. Now, I don't want to sort of get into a big debate about this or to or, or, or to be critical even of what you said, but my sort of I come to the realization now that there is no such thing as autonomous knowledge. There is no such thing, because knowledge is built on previous knowledge. Previous knowledge is built on knowledge before that. Where did that knowledge come from? It always comes from some sort of power constellation. So even so you can have, for example, knowledge that represents subaltern groups, right? But that is not autonomous, right? It is linked up to a project of subaltern politics. And to say that, well, our knowledge is autonomous and their knowledge is, state or business or colonial and so on, for me, is a bit misleading. Okay, so if we want to say that we are, promoting the kind of knowledge that would subvert, that would challenge, and so on, existing structures of power, then the knowledge that we have, if it's autonomous, it is weak, because it's just us, intellectuals, sitting in a room writing. Right. What alternative sort of understandings of power and so on, right, gain strength exactly when they are not autonomous, when they are linked to political traditions, when they are linked to political movements, to civil society impulses and so on. All right. So I think that there is room, certainly, in this journal, if it wants to do it, to give room to, sort of discourses on Islamic politics that challenge, particular orthodoxies. And I think that would be really interesting. Right. But I think that we need to be clear that knowledge is always about contestation of power. But that contestation of power doesn't take place on equal terms. That some powers are more dominant than others. And if Pa Phillips and Pa Aan wants to give room to subaltern views, then they're helping to empower, the subaltern. Okay, but I think one needs to think of it in terms of contestation over knowledge as being part of contestation over power. So the language of autonomous knowledge and so on and so forth, I have come to have some trouble with, but not for reasons that I think a lot of more conservative scholars than myself would state. Okay, because you can ask Pat Phillips. I've annoyed everybody in Indonesia. There's nobody I have not annoyed.
Musa? Musa is a master student from Gambia.
All right, thank you, Professor, for that quite interesting deliberation. I have a question here regarding publication. I think looking at publication, what you mentioned earlier, that is regarding the issue of language, the power of language. I have read a bit of literature or body of literature written by highly credible professors, but when I looked at it and then evaluate, I'm like, are these professors or students of knowledge? Because yesterday, I received an email from one of my professors when I was doing my first master's. He is from South Africa, but again, I turned in an assignment to him, and then the assignment was bit, I will say, not standard at all. So the work was published as a scopus, and I'm like, why is it so easy for professors who are recognized, well known, to publish garbage or rubbish on credible journals, and when it comes to would-be scholars, it takes quite a bit long for them to able to publish something you know
There's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of them usually has to do with the journal itself. I know many journals who have rejected some of the biggest names in their fields. They don't give another expletive here. Who these writers are. If the double-blind review comes and it says it's not publishable, they don't publish it. But then there are other journals who may be struggling. They want to have a big name. So no matter how rubbish the article is, they publish it. I mean, look, I did say the world is unfair. Well, it is unfair. Okay, so once you have a name, it is easier, certainly, to influence editorial boards. Unfortunately, the influencing editorial boards isn't always, comes from your sort of academic performance, etc. But also in some countries, I don't know about your country, it can be because of political links. So a professor who is minister of this and that probably can get published in any journal he or she would like in Asia, no matter how rubbish it is. Right? But again, what I would like to say is that this journal that this university is coming up with, right? And this is why I said before, it has to practice best practices, right? It means it must not succumb to these sorts of things. If it's rubbish, even though it's by a minister or by a big name professor from UI, it's rubbish. And in fact, when I say that people have to be brought into the culture of international publication, it includes the idea that you should not assume that you will be published just because of who you are. In Indonesia, there are people who write to journals, and the journal editors say, well, we want you to rewrite this, and that, and then they get angry because they expected their article to be published as is. you should be honored that I sent this to you. My suggestion is that this journal never publishes from people like that. They have their own networks. They have their own outlets and so on. Do not add another outlet for them. Only the best publications on the basis of whatever criteria and so on, and the resources and the advice that you get from your international editorial board and so on, that you publish. Otherwise, you undermine your own ambitions, and you cannot then go about and say, look, we are a global South journal that aspires to compete with the best journals that comes out of the Ukraine. So, because they'll say, oh, you publish this shit, sorry, article. My students are used to this. But yeah, I'm told that, in Indonesia, I shouldn't be doing it, but never mind. Okay, but they're used to, we cannot set the precedent really where you let in, again, shit articles, because once you let that precedent through, it becomes something that can possibly be habitual. Okay.
Thank you. Last question is from Ararat, PhD students at the Faculty of Social Sciences from Armenia. Please keep your question short.
Yes, partly my question was answered, but I would ask that how this power and not fairness can be described if we will invite Routledge or elsewhere or others to have cooperation in terms of they are implying what will be published. I'm not talking about the quality of the article, the language, the argument, the format, etc. If we look at to the well-known journals today, you can see majority of the content publishing is pro-Ukraine against Russia. You barely find any balanced argument in that term. So now here, if this field is at least something that we are being able to publish what we want, we will not be forced not to write. So how it will be if we can cooperate with them, because they can force you, right? What to publish, what not to publish. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, they can't force you, and of course, it depends on the sort of deal and contract that you have with them. It depends on you have to, I think, maintain editorial autonomy, and it is possible. But I think there may be a clause where they say, well, if you're going to publish articles that support Adolf Hitler, we're not going to publish. There'll be things like that. Again, let me give you the example that I know of, because I've been sort of closely involved with JCA, Journal of Contemporary Asia, as a I forget, editorial a board of editor or something, editorial board of it, right? Now, it's a Taylor and Francis journal, but for many years it was published in the Philippines by a Philippines activist who brought together a network of Southeast Asian activists in the 70s. Right? In the 90s, it struck a deal with Taylor and Francis. I don't think that Taylor and Francis has actually intervened with the content of that of that journal, because it's still anti-capitalist, it's still anti-neoliberal globalization, it's still pro subaltern groups, and so on and so forth. So I think within sort of deals with these big publishers, it is possible to maintain your editorial autonomy. What they are interested in is whether you are viable. So whether there's a market for you, right? They're capitalists. If there's a market, that's fine. I don't have to agree with that market. Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our event has come to an end, but we need to give another round of applause for Pak Vedi. So on behalf of our editorial team, Pak Philip, Pak Shiro, Bu Nidel, Pak Ridwan, and Syahrul, we would like to thank Prof. Vedi again and audience for your comments and also questions so that we can improve the performance of our journal. We have published 2 times, and then we are going to publish another editions in June. Also, we would like to thank some people who have helped this organize this event: Syahrul, Rida, Hunidal, and Pak Afri. And we wish you to see in our next event in the future. Thank you.